end. So the overview is we're going to talk about where St. John's was when I arrived in terms of relevant parts of this conversation. I'm going to talk a little bit about the importance of lay leadership, the role and responsibility of vestry members that is defined by the Constitution and canons of the Episcopal Church and those of the Diocese of Alabama. We're talking about the bylaws that we now have, why and how we have those. The Nominating Committee, how it is put together and what their responsibilities are. The requirements for annual meeting and how we are going to vote at this year's meeting, which is January 24th from 9:30 to 10:15. January 24th, 9:30 to 10:15. So that's the lay of the land. That's a lot, but we're going to try to get through it and allow time for any questions. As we enter this, I want some of what you're going to hear is a lot of what I put in the letter that we sent out. That it's going to get, it's in print form. It will hit hopefully mail tomorrow or Friday in the Eagle, but it's the exact same thing online that we have made available through the Facebook page. We should be able to put a link to that also on the website. So hopefully that has done a relatively good job of explaining, and I'm going to try to fill in the gaps tonight in this conversation. Okay, the next slide. Let me give you a little bit of my background, and so what helped to get us to the point of moving toward looking at St. John's practices. I've served on various nonprofit boards throughout my adult life. Some of them have been church related, some of them have not been. I was on the Virginia Seminary Board of Trustees for 2 years, which was a huge board and covered lots of areas in that. I have been part of various leadership structures and vestry structures and clergy structures at different sized parishes throughout my life as a lay employee and as a priest. Most recently, one of the things that's informed this conversation for me is I was on the board of trustees for St. George's School in Collierville. It's an Episcopal school with about 1,200 students, pre-K through 12. It's a unique model. That's aside, but one of the committees I served on was the Committee on Trustees. Our role was to look at how we kind of governed ourselves, what the self-governance policies were, how we adapted during COVID actually was part of our conversations, and how we replaced board members and all those related things. So this process is familiar to me in different settings and in different contexts, but also want you to know it's informed by all of that. So if you've ever served on a nonprofit board or if you've ever served on a church board or a committee, and I should say I've served on every committee that there is in the church, standing committee, bishop and council, executive committee, camp and conference center committee. I've been president or chair of several of those committees, general convention deputy 3 times. So all of those things inform and help shape what I think are some best practices that we've looked at. When I arrived, one of the first things I did, I sat down with the wardens and I said, okay, tell me how the vestry is structured, how it's governed, where are the bylaws, what are the rules of engagement in the vestry, how does this work? And they said, we don't have anything. There was nothing that was codified, memorialized, no written document. It really, all of the structure and leadership and practices were really held together in a wonderful, really virtually impossible yet wonderful way, with Robert being kind of the common glue that held all that together. In a transition, that's very difficult for a new person to assume that role as the glue of holding all that together, because there were lots of variations on a theme, and there were adaptations from year to year for all kinds of reasons. That is not new to St. John's. I believe the archives folks told me, I think my data is right on this, that up until the 1940s, vestry members were selected at St. John's for life. So that's roughly 100 years of the first 100 years of the parish. Vestry members were selected for life, and when one would die, the current vestry members, all men at that point, all men selected a replacement.
I'm a good girl.
So it was not, there's no vestry, no parish vote, no nothing. And that is one, that change happened after the 40s, I believe. And the level of involvement from rectors has varied. And over the last 25 years or so, the selection process for nominees, how the wardens were selected, all of those issues really changed slightly from year to year based on different dynamics. So what we set out to do is try to make the vestry and how we did this process transparent. We tried to make it where it was understood by everybody. And most of all, and we can move to the next slide, we tried to make it important as a way of honoring lay leadership. If you look in the back of the prayer book, and it says in the catechism, who are the ministers of the church? It says in this order: the laity, bishops, priests, and deacons. Laity, bishops, priests, and deacons. It lists our baptized ministry as lay folks as the most important ministry in the church. And we want to honor that and celebrate that with strong leadership. And that begins with the vestry, and that goes down to all the different committee leaders, the ministry leaders, all the volunteers, whether it's altar guild or flower guild, or those who work with the hymn ministry, or those who do the backpack ministry at Carver. All of that lay leadership needs to be celebrated and held up. And so we want to value that, but we also want to make sure that we are tapping in and inviting and empowering a pretty good breadth of lay leadership. There are a lot of people in this parish, and there are a lot of really strong leaders in this parish. And we want to make sure that we utilize the gifts and the talents and the skills of as many of those leaders as we possibly can. So that is ultimately important. All right, next slide. Roles and responsibility of vestry members. So the vestry's role is actually defined pretty clearly in the canons of the church. Now, let me say kind of a pragmatic, anecdotal reflection. Vestries take responsibilities at different parishes very differently, and they use their role very differently. Some vestries operate on a liaison basis, and they are involved in all kinds of different ministries in terms of being connections to staff or program volunteers. Some of them only focus on the strategic aspect of the church. Some of them serve as ushers and greeters on Sunday mornings. Different churches use the vestry in different ways. And so they have informal responsibilities, and they have informal roles. But the canons of the church give a very specific legal, or what we would call canonical. You'll hear that a lot. Our laws are called canons. And so they have very specific canonical responsibilities. And we'll look at those if we can go to the slide on the next slide. So here's the way that life works in terms of the church, because we are a hierarchical church. We have at the top of the list the prayer book and the rubrics of the church. Believe it or not, what is the most binding law and policy and practices in the church are the little italics and the directions for services in the Book of Common Prayer. Rubrics trump all other legal issues, because we say as a people, we pray what we believe, and We believe that. Right under that are the Constitution and canons of the Episcopal Church. Under that are the Constitution and canons of the Diocese of Alabama, which must coexist and not contradict the Constitution and canons of the Episcopal Church. And then there are parishes below that, and our bylaws, and we'll get to this in a minute, coexist with the canons of the diocese, which coexist with the canons of the Episcopal Church, and don't contradict one another. So we are not simply bound by our whims and our wishes. We cannot codify those or make those into law or have any legal standing without them being consistent with and congruent with the canons of the national church and the diocese. So in the Episcopal canons, Canon 14 of parish vestries, we have to have one. That's what the first rule says. We have to have one. Second is they are agents and legal representatives by state law and or by the diocese. The vestry are the legal representatives of the parish, just like any nonprofit. They are the legal agents. And unless the state law is contradictory, the rector presides at the vestry meeting or another member of the vestry. That's an interesting thing because only the rector or a vestry member have the legal right and the canonical right to preside. I can't hand the meeting over to Tiana and ask her to preside because she doesn't have any, in a legal sense, she doesn't have any standing. There's no authority to preside. So that is an important note as well. Okay, so we have to factor in what the national canons say. We have to have a vestry. They are the legal agents, and the rector presides. All right, next slide. Then we go to the Constitution and canons of the Episcopal Diocese of Alabama. And the next slide. So the main draw on this particular slide is at the top, and that the vestry shall consist of not less than 3 nor more than 30 lay communicants of the parish qualified to vote at the parish meeting, elected at a parish meeting for a term of no longer than 3 years, with nearly as may be not more than 1/2 of the terms expiring simultaneously. Okay. That is what we know for our parameters for the size of the vestry, somewhere between 3 and 30. I served at a church that was about the size of St. John's, and they had 21 vestry members, which while I was on staff there, they reduced to 18. I have been at parishes with 12, 15, 18, and 21. I can just tell you from an effectiveness standpoint, and this is not about representation or anything, this is an effectiveness standpoint, the most effective vestries I've served on are smaller. Some of you are on boards that have lots and lots of people, which they have lots of subcommittees, but in essence, those committees aren't empowered to make lots of decisions. And so we want to make the vestry the size to make it most efficient and most effective and most representative of the ministries of the parish. I just want to point out something. When we were looking at these for the bylaws, which we'll get to in a minute, one of the inconsistencies, there are 2 inconsistencies that we learned. One is, if you notice, that there's a provision for how vacancies are filled. Okay? We didn't necessarily follow that canon very well in prior years at St. John's. There were all kinds of different ways in which vacancies were filled. So we are fixing that. We fix that in the bylaws. In essence, what normally would happen is, if there's a vacancy on the vestry filled that spot, but they filled that spot for the remainder of the term instead of what the canons say until the next parish meeting. So if we had someone move this year, next year's parish meeting, we would have to vote for 7 to fill that empty spot. if that makes sense. We found out we weren't doing that consistently. The other part, and this is going to come back to this when we talk about the vestry meeting, the annual meeting, is the canons tell us that you have to be present to vote. And that was not the case. People mailed in votes, people did proxy votes, people sent emails, people made phone calls. The canons are very specific that you have to be present to vote. That is a canon that is not unusual. Every diocese I have been in, that has been the canon, and that has been the case. It wasn't always enforced at St. John's, but it's what is legal. I'll come back to that in a minute. If you'll go to the next slide, please. So if you look at the highlighted part, this is what I think is very, very important to hear. The vestry shall assist the rector in the nurture and extension of Christ's church. How shall they do that? The vestry shall have the legislative authority because they are the legal agents and representatives, the legislative authority for the parish, and shall transact all of its temporal business. So the next sentence defines temporal business. The vestry shall be responsible for furnishing, preserving, and adequately insuring the parish property, including all items necessary for public worship, for maintaining adequate parish records, and for managing the financial resources of the parish. The vestry shall maintain order and decorum during the time of public worship. Okay? Those are the very specific legal and canonical functions of the vestry. Anything they do that is above essentially maintaining the building and property, insuring it, and overseeing the finances of the parish, anything that the vestry does above that is grace and gravy, but it is not necessarily canonical. Okay? So, their functions by the canons is relatively limited. And that's, I just want us to know that. The reason I'm pointing this out is because we are structuring the vestry in order to function in its fullest capacity with a lot of gifts and talents and skills of the people on the vestry to strategically, not reactively, not reflexively, but strategically, forward-looking, to manage our temporal affairs, to look at what items that we need to work on in terms of building and maintenance. For example, the stained glass windows are in desperate need of repair. That is a specific function of the vestry to provide leadership for that work. And also to manage the finances of the parish. And we do that in a couple of ways. We have a treasurer, we have people who do oversight of that, along with the treasurer. Someone on the vestry typically leads the stewardship campaign. The segregation of duties that come with running a business are divided out among different folks on the vestry. The vestry members are check signers so that we follow common accounting practices. So there is a lot of work that goes into that kind of on the day-to-day side of that, but also right-sizing the vestry so that we can do this strategically. But if you look at the canons, their role is limited. I want to say that because I know sometimes people worry about the vestry. And I'll offer this observation. The vestry only gets noticed when the vestry makes a big decision. And sometimes those decisions are rightly the vestry's, and sometimes they're wrongly the vestry's, but the vestry was involved and the rector consulted with the vestry. But what we are trying to do at St. John's is make sure that we are doing that which is specified toward the vestry's role, that is strategic, that's forward-looking, and that is not about any kind of other agenda. Because we follow the canons of the church, there's no other agenda or there's no reason to be suspicious or worried or fearful or anxious. We are managing the proper building and grounds, and we're managing the finances. That's what the vestry job is. Okay. Hopefully that makes sense. All right, next slide. I jumped the gun on this. Here it is. Here's who can elect. The parish meeting must be annually. It's got to be called by the vestry, reasonable notice. The rector presides, and that people have to come and be physically present. When we started writing before we started writing the bylaws, given that we are in a pandemic, the bishop and the chancellor, which is the legal authority for the diocese lawyer, who interprets the canons on behalf of the diocese for the rest of the diocese, emphasized in a special email and a follow-up letter that the physically present requirement stood even in the pandemic. And so they did not tell us how we could vote or how we could elect vestry or why we should, or they just said you have to come up with a way that people who are physically present can vote. Those were the directions. They did not waive the canons because we're in a pandemic. So we have to abide by that. And again, this is one of those variations where that was not always the case at St. John's. I understand that this is limiting. Not everybody can get out. We have parishioners who are unable to be present, especially in a pandemic. There are parishioners who are unable to be present for other situations and circumstances. But until these rules are changed at the diocesan level, these are the rules we have to live by. Let me explain why this is important. If, God forbid, something happened and someone took legal action against St. John's, because in the past we have not followed the canons in electing the vestry, a really good lawyer, or maybe even an average lawyer, would immediately say, I know how you elected your vestry. You had write-in ballots, you had people email, you had phone calls, you had people drop off ballots. Not everybody was physically present. Your vestry actually doesn't exist according to the canons. It is not a duly elected vestry. That would be a compelling argument. And so we have to follow these canons because they provide the legal backbone and foundation upon which we can actually exercise business, and the vestry can be, according to the law, the legal representatives of St. John's. So that is a worst case example, but it's a fair example. Okay. Next slide. Going back, when I sat down with Jimmy and Radney and said, how do we do things? What's written down? And we said nothing. I said, well, having just rolled off this trustee committee at St. George's, and let me just say at the school, St. George's School, where I was on the trustee committee, we had a conflict with board members and with leadership. And the thing that allowed us to navigate through that conflict, and it was major conflict, what allowed us to navigate through that and understand what our roles and responsibilities were, was that it was written down. Everybody knew who had responsibilities and what roles there were and who could take what actions in order to deal with the situation because they were written down. And I cannot tell you the value of that is really necessary. That is a necessary thing to have. So when we discovered that we didn't have anything written down, I asked Jimmy McLemore, senior warden, Radney, junior warden, to talk to some people and to come up with a way in which we could begin to look at bylaws as a template for our governance. And so Jimmy asked Hank Hutchison, who is a parishioner at Cabell Howard and a partner at Cabell Howard, to work on this. He gladly took this on. I will tell you that he gave us hours and hours and hours without billing us for it. We used already other parishes and their bylaws as templates, and then we also took into consideration the practices of St. John's over time, really over the last 25 to 30 years. What was done and what are the practices that are done that are also congruent and in accordance with the diocesan canons and the national canons. So we had to make them legal. We had to make them consistent. So I mentioned a couple of the examples, like replacing vestry members. The size of the vestry was never codified. That was kind of an informal thing. How we selected wardens was not written down anywhere. That was just a kind of a tradition passed along. There were several areas, and I don't know if Jimmy or Radney want to weigh in on anything, but we now have them. And what we discovered also in this process is, and Jimmy, I think I'm right in saying this, our charter, we had filed a charter in 1949, I believe, with the state of Alabama as an organization, maybe in 39. And that charter was no longer consistent with the laws of Alabama. So we were not necessarily, as an organization, even registered with the state of Alabama in a way in which we were compliant with the laws of Alabama for organizations. Is that right, Jimmy?
That's right. It was 1949.
Okay.
When we were organized as a nonprofit corporation, and we were inconsistent with the law. We were also inconsistent with the practices that were actually occurring at St. John. So what we did, as Hank handled it, was to restate and file a new declaration of incorporation pursuant to the law. So we get the benefit of the nonprofit code in the state of Alabama. We've also made it consistent with our church.
And so we went through multiple iterations of the bylaws. I mean, multiple iterations. If you can imagine, you guys all have dealt with lawyers. Some of you are lawyers, and you just keep going and going and going until you get the product that you want. And so we also had to make sure with the diocesan chancellor and the bishop that we were consistent with what they understood the canons to be, and their interpretation and our interpretations were on par. So we refiled the charter, and now we've also put our bylaws on file with the diocese. So we are a recognized organization in the state of Alabama, which is good for tax reasons. It's good for all kinds of reasons. We can send your contribution statement and you can make that a deduction on your taxes with no fear that we actually exist, because now we do. That just little things like that. The vestry had a lengthy conversation about the bylaws. They had advanced time to read them. Hank Hutchison came to the meeting. We walked through every single issue on the vestry bylaws, and the discussion was good. The vestry agreed that we needed to have these bylaws. The vestry agreed with what the bylaws were trying to accomplish, and we adopted them. We presented them really in October. We had a vestry discussion in November. We approved the bylaws as amended and agreed upon by the vestry at the December vestry meeting. There's nothing really crazy in there. It just is, we just now have in writing how we are to govern ourselves. Okay, so that moves us to, since we've now written down how we're going to do certain things based on previous practices, we formed a nominating committee. The nominating committee had typically just been the senior warden. We expanded the nominating committee to be the outgoing class of vestry members. So they are people that you elected 3 years ago at a parish meeting in person, or probably by proxy too. But there are people who are duly elected 3 years ago who have served their time, more than served their time, and they met to be the nominating committee. And we had to accomplish a couple of things. We had to come up with enough nominees to fill at least 6 positions. And we had to figure out how to present these nominees in a way in which we could elect vestry members in the middle of a pandemic with people voting in person in the most civil, strategic, pastoral, representative way. The nominating committee came up with 6 diverse names. So this is 7 folks. It is Kathleen Bradford, not Nancy Bradford. Sorry, Nancy, you've been nominated for the Vestry. You're competing with Kathleen.
Sorry, that's my fault.
So the nominating committee met, had an hour-long discussion, and they came up with these 6 people: Kathleen Bradford, Ellen Habermacher, William Haynes, Cam Hughes, Michelle Shaw, Wyatt Wells. That is an impressive list of people who are leaders, who are active in ministry, and represent lots of different ideas and perspectives and ministries at St. John's. I'm very impressed. They had to call these folks, and they had to get their consent to stand for election, and we have 6 people for 6 slots. So I am thrilled, and I appreciate them standing for this, and grateful for that. And so let me tell you a little bit about, and I guess we can. This is part of the. Well, I don't want to jump ahead on the slides. So let me tell you a practice, and we'll get to this in a minute also. In previous years, the warden made roughly, I don't think any less than 30 phone calls or emails to get enough people to stand for election. And enough people could have been 7, 10, 14, but to get enough people to stand for election. What we discovered in that is that even though we would have 10 people or 12 people, there were generally 7 people who were nominated that were almost automatically going to get elected because all kinds of reasons. And so the effort was to get enough people on the slate so that basically 7 people that everybody presupposed would get elected got elected. And that's just the pragmatics of it, the politics of it. It made it very difficult to get people to stand for election who didn't think they ever had a chance to be elected. Despite the fact that they were qualified, despite the fact they had gifts and skills to bring, it was very, very challenging to get qualified people to stand for election because they just didn't believe the way the process worked, they would ever get elected. That is not kind. That's not pastoral. It's also a little bit short-sighted because we're not using all the minds and all the strategic and all the strategic gifts and skills of all of our parishioners. And so, so this year with 6 people, we have a pandemic. I'll get to that in a second. But we also have really gifted people who can serve, and we're excited about them serving. And we didn't have to twist arms or cajole or convince people who didn't want to run simply because we needed more names on the ballot. That's just not a healthy process. Okay, so next slide. What's going to happen at the parish meeting? Rector's report, treasurer's report. Helen Wells, after 25 plus years, 26 years of being the treasurer for St. John's, which, by the way, may be a record long time for a treasurer. She served 25 or 26 years as treasurer for St. John's, retired in the fall. The Vestry has elected Richard Bradford to be the treasurer in her replacement. But I have decided to create, and I've talked to Helen about this, an award in her honor for outstanding lay leadership. And I will select the recipient of that award every year. It could be 1 or 2 people who have shown incredible commitment and devotion in the spirit of Helen Wells to the ministry of St. John's. And there could be 25 people who qualify for it every year. There should be, but only 1 or 2 will get it. That's because I've got to make choices. So I'm thrilled to present the first ever Helen Wells Award for Lay Ministry at the parish meeting. We're also going to pray for Deanna's new ministry as a full-time associate rector. That will be part of it. The voting will open at 9:30, as will the parish meeting, and will go until 10:15. We'll talk about how that's going to work, and the meeting will be live streamed. Okay. How to vote. That's a nice slide. So we will have some people present, obviously in the nave, socially distanced, wearing masks. And we will present at the very beginning of the meeting the nominees for Vestry and cast a ballot for those that are present. They will vote a ballot and they will turn that in. You can vote on your ballot for one person or 6 people. The election is by plurality. Even though there are only 6, we still are going to cast a ballot because we vote for this. For those who are watching the meeting at home, in order to qualify to vote in person, you would have to come to church. We will hand you a ballot in the driveway. You can fill it out, turn it in, and your vote will be counted. Or you can come into the building and vote, and your vote will be counted. That's it. That is one of the ways, and what we thought is the best way for us to comply with the voting in person. And a way in which we could get as many people to vote as possible. On a Sunday during the pandemic, we've had roughly 100 people in the building. Okay, we wanted to make sure that more than 100 people could vote. That seemed a very limited number of people. So by providing this drive-up option of voting, will means you are present, you're in the building, and you can vote during the time frame of the parish meeting from 9:30 to 10:15. Everybody should vote, and I know there are 6 people, and you feel like you're not voting, but you are in fact voting. And so I want to alleviate any concerns about this. The decision for 6 was based on 3 things, and I said this on the letter. The first is we've reduced the number of Vestry members from 21 to 18, so we only need 6 spots. Secondly, as I said a minute ago, we have to find qualified candidates and people who are willing to serve in this capacity. And that is not as easy as you think, unless we simply ask the same people over and over and over again to run for Vestry. It doesn't mean we won't do that. It just means it should not be the default. And the third reason is, with a pandemic and limited ability to gather, we thought this was the safest and most effective and most fair and most loving way to elect a Vestry. There are still going to be 14 people that you have elected in a parish meeting with everybody present or proxy sitting on the Vestry with the 6 new people. The 6 people were chosen by 7 people who were duly elected at a Vestry meeting by all those people with multiple names on the ballot. So in a representative democracy, this is a fair way in a pandemic, given the circumstances, to have a ballot. I just believe that. We're not trying to pull the wool over anybody's eyes. We're not trying to trick anybody. We're not trying to fool anybody. There's no agenda. It is what is fair, loving, strategic, effective, given all the parameters and all the conditions we're operating under. The nominating committee next year, which will be made up of the 7 outgoing Vestry members, including the senior warden, will put together a slate for next year. They could choose 6 people next year. They could choose 600 people next year. The bylaws don't limit the number of people on the ballot. I will say this, and I know that this is not, that we're at St. John's, and so we've done things a particular way for the last 20, 25 years. But I can tell you that in the larger church, probably half or more churches vote simply a slate, rather than vote with 14 nominees for 7 spots or 12 nominees for 6 spots. More and more churches are voting a slate, as long as that slate is chosen by the Vestry and as long as that slate is diverse. We're not trying to sell that. We're trying to present it this year because we have circumstances that dictate this might be a good way to do it. But again, next year, they could have 60 nominees. And if someone wants to submit a name to the nominating committee, they certainly can do that. That doesn't mean they'll be nominated, because it is contingent upon that person saying yes. But we're not shutting off nominations from others and limiting it only to those 7 people. Those 7 people on the nominating committee will serve as to vet all the nominees and make sure they are in agreement and that they're willing to run. So that committee doesn't limit the number of nominees either. I hope that helps. So that's how you'll vote. And we ask that you do vote because it is an important thing to vote. But I want to make sure you know that although this is different this year, it's just different this year. Please don't be anxious. Please don't panic. Please don't be worried. There are a lot of considerations to get this done in the right way. And I think this is a really, really good solution. To be selfish for just a second, I'm on your side. I'm your pastor. I'm your priest. I love you. I'm here. I chose to come here. I didn't choose to come here to do something crazy. And having a good, strong vestry is in my best interest. Trust me. It's in your best interest to have a good, strong vestry. And so I think that this is a great way to accomplish that this year. I hope you hear that. The vestry knows this. Others who work with me know I am transparent. I'm open. I'm candid. Sometimes too candid. Sometimes too honest. But this is a great way to have a vestry that provides strong leadership for St. John's. And next year, if it's different, it will be different. And we'll see. But I hope that you will trust God. These bylaws do not change how God operates in the world. They don't change how Jesus' love is everywhere in the world. They will not undo Christianity. We'll be okay. I promise you that. I promise. Okay.
John,
Deanna, do you have questions that have been sent to you?
No, I think we forgot to tell them that.
Okay.
hey, John,
If you have questions, will you please send those in the chat function to Deanna, and she'll
Why don't we do
because
that?
we have a bunch of people on here, 30 people on here, and it'll be hard if everybody's trying to talk at once. So if you have questions, type them up, send them to Deanna real quick. We'll answer them. Or just send them in the chat box. I'll be able to see them too.
How do I do that?
John, are there any provisions for write-ins on the ballots?
There's no nothing that dictates write-ins or nominees from the floor. Someone certainly could write someone in, I suspect, on the ballot if they chose to. But we would not be able to verify their qualifications, meaning their attendance, their participation as a communicant in good standing, essentially. We wouldn't be able to verify that until after the election. So that's the problem with doing write-ins. Like if someone wrote in, if we had a parishioner named Charlie Brown and someone wrote Charlie Brown's name in, but Charlie Brown has not been in church in 2 years, nor has Charlie Brown been a giver of record, Charlie Brown could not serve on the vestry. Even though he was written in, even though he might have gotten a plurality, he would be disqualified from serving because of the canons. Okay.
I don't know how to do it.
From Wyatt, I assume there's nothing that prevents us from altering the bylaws again at some time in the future, except of course that they must conform to Alabama law. Wyatt, that is correct.
I can't.
The bylaws can be changed by the vestry with a 2/3 vote, I believe, is what it says in the bylaws, at any point. So, I will tell you, this. I think it's funny. Of all the changes in the bylaws, once we kind of talked through the logic of it all, the only thing the vestry really worried about was indemnity. That is, were they covered for their actions? Which that was our big hot topic. The 6 people nominated are strong. This is from Valerie, and look forward to their terms. If they are already selected, why do we need to vote for them? Because they are not been elected.
I don't.
They have only been presented as
I gotta
nominees.
send it.
They are not elected until they are voted on by the parish. So a vote is necessary. And if you don't vote on them, then you're stuck with Jimmy McLemore and Kat Daly and who else is in that group? Mike Jenkins, and we don't want to be stuck with them.
Does that mean Jimmy would stay senior warden?
Yes. We go back to the old 1930s way of doing business and he'd be senior warden for
Perpetuity,
life.
Jimmy?
I think I've already been voted out.
For life.
For life. That really was. That's the old way it was done. It's fascinating. They'd look that up.
Well, there are a lot of organizations that present a nominated slate for approval by the body. And usually when you're not in the middle of a pandemic, someone could offer another nominee. But right now, that's kind of difficult to do. So, but this is not out of the ordinary or extraordinary, and it does take a vote to confirm it. If somebody on that list all of a sudden committed a huge scandal and got no votes at the Vestry election, then you would only have 5 people elected.
Yeah, theoretically, that's correct. Thinking like a lawyer, yes, that would be true. And then the vestry would have to
Surprise.
appoint someone to fill that term until the next parish meeting when someone would then be elected for a 2-year term to fill out the balance of it. So yes, that's correct, Rosa. And that is true. We are among the few organizations left in the world that still have an open ballot, have the option for an open ballot in electing the governing body. Most nonprofits, if not all nonprofits these days, and school boards and country club boards and nonprofit boards, simply present a slate that is the right number of slots, the right number of people for the right number of slots, and the large body confirms that slate, votes for that slate. But most of them do not have open elections. They self-select their fellow board members, and that's how most of them operate.
Hey, John,
Yes.
somebody chatted me directly. Someone's come in a little late and missed some of the previous discussion. So could you please reiterate how the nominating committee does want input from the parish with respect to considering people to stand for nominations?
Yes. So what we will do is, and it's a relatively common practice. We will announce, let's say in November, we will announce nominations. The nominating committee is seeking nominations for the next vestry election. At which point and there'll be a contact person, at which point you can make recommendations to the nominating committee for those folks. And the nominating committee will meet just like they did this year. They will come up with a list of people. They will reach out and contact them. They will, first of all, verify that they are communicants in good standing and meet the requirements. And if they are, they will then reach out to these people and ask them to stand for election. It all depends on the people who are willing to stand for election. If we got 10 names and only 6 of them say yes, we have 6 people. If we get 10 names and 8 of them say yes, we'll have 8 nominees. We will never, and because this is just the right thing to do, we will never submit a ballot with only one more person than the available slots. So we'll never, for 6 slots, we will never present a ballot with 7. It has to be at least 8. And that's just to be kind.
Misery loves company.
So the nominating committee can take names from anybody, but it doesn't necessarily mean they'll make the ballot because that person has to say yes. And they have to meet the requirements of being on the vestry. That's what we have consistently run into over time here, is people not willing to serve. And we're trying to change that. Does that help answer the question, Deanna?
Yes, thank you. Perfect.
Any other questions?
John, did you see Betty Beal's question?
No.
It's very similar to Valerie's. Her internet was a little intermittent.
Okay.
And she wanted to know why we bother to vote for people when the slate's already set.
The only thing that is set are the nominees. The canons dictate that the vestry elect that the parish elect the vestry. So we still have to have an election in order to have vestry members, new vestry members. That there are 6 is because that's the people who said yes, and because we're in a pandemic, and because we think this is the most efficient, fair, strategic, compassionate way to elect vestry members in the middle of a pandemic and meeting the requirements that people vote in person. But it's the same way. If we have 6 people, you'd have to vote. If we had 8 people, you'd have to vote. I mean, there's really not a difference. It's just that we have 6 people.
Yeah, and I think just like, so practically, if you have 6 people and one person voted, and they voted for all 6 people, and no one else voted, you'd have a duly elected slate, right?
Yeah.
But if only one person voted, and that one person only voted for 2 people, then you only have 2 people that are elected.
That's correct.
So it's important that there is at least enough votes such that 6 people are elected. Now, if 50 people voted for only 5 people, and that one person like never got any votes, then the vestry only has 5 duly elected people. So that's part of why the voting matters, and it's not necessarily just a completely foregone conclusion.
I would recommend that each nominee at least vote for themselves if they want to.
Yeah, so if the nominees don't show up and vote, right?
Right.
Yeah.
So I saw Rosa had a question about what constitutes a giver. The Canon 9, Section 3 says, those who are known to the rector and treasurer as regular contributors to the support of the parish program. So a regular contributor, and that they are known. So if you give $1 million in cash, you are not known to the rector and treasurer. It'd be hard for me to give you a vote because I don't know that you're doing that. But if you're a giver of record, then you're in good standing.
John, for clarification, does a giver of record mean making a pledge?
It would not have to be a pledge. We have people who don't pledge but act like pledgers.
Okay.
So someone might not have completed a card, but they give a check once a month or every week.
Okay.
And they are a giver of record. They are known to the treasurer and the rector as such. Ideally, everybody pledges. Once you get on the vestry, we're going to tell you got to pledge, by the way. Why? So regular contributors would include those who don't give money but do give time. That is not what the canons say. To be known to the treasurer, you have to give money.
Yeah, and I think the distinction is between someone who pledges versus someone who's a contributor, because those are different, right? Because you can contribute without being financially contribute without being a pledger.
Yes, and if you do that and you are a communicant, you are technically a communicant in good standing, eligible to be on the vestry and to vote.
Right.
It's both of those scenarios.
Yeah.
But to Wyatt's question of what if you give time but not money, that doesn't count because the treasurer does not give you a contribution statement based on the time. It does count. Let me rephrase that. It counts in the kingdom of God in the ministry, and God is watching the amount of time you give. It doesn't make you a communicant in good standing. Did I see another one come through?
Okay, so this is a question. Let me just read it. Why can Kathleen Bradford be on the vestry with Richard serving as treasurer when Sam Collier is not allowed to serve, basically because his wife is on staff?
Because his wife is on staff, and the vestry has immediate responsibility for overseeing the budget, including the budget that funds staff, and it can create a conflict. Additionally, if there were a personnel issue and the vestry needed to be involved as legal representatives of the parish, then he would have to recuse himself from, or any spouse or significant of a vestry member would have to recuse themselves. It's a conflict of interest, in short. Richard, as treasurer, is a volunteer, and the oversight to the vestry, he has responsibilities to the vestry. So in part, they oversee him. But there's not any information that they will share that creates a conflict. In fact, what is different about the canons, because the canons didn't factor in churches having financial administrators. In our case, the only people who know what your financial status is the financial administrator, Heather, and the rector. The treasurer doesn't even know individual giving. What about high school students? They would be excluded from voting unless they are regular contributors. I'm not going to kick them out. Rosa, are you? That's my answer. At one point in time, they were not allowed to vote, but they cannot serve on the vestry in Alabama and other states because you have to be 18 to be on a corporate board. So they can't serve on the vestry, but if they are confirmed, I have no problem with them voting. And I've never kicked anyone out of a vestry out of a parish meeting because they gave $2 or they gave $2 million.
That's provided their parents are financial contributors or pledges.
Right. I think they're covered under that. That's a good distinction. Did I answer the question okay about the conflict, the difference between Kathleen and Richard and Sam? And it's very common in most parishes that you do not allow spouses of staff members to serve on the vestry, just because there are often things that the vestry has to deal with that relate to staff, and it would be not helpful to have a spouse on the vestry.
And John, I would say that with that point you just made is covered in our bylaws.
Right. And we don't have spouses on the vestry at the same time. So technically Richard is like, you can argue this, Richard is ex officio as treasurer. So he doesn't really have a vote either on the vestry as treasurer. He is an officer of the vestry, but not of the vestry. Just like the clerk. The clerk is not elected to serve on the vestry. The clerk is ex officio to keep records for the vestry. So there's no conflict in the fact that Richard doesn't vote. I suspect Kathleen could vote him off the island if she wanted to. But yes, he is a volunteer. Thank you, Wyatt. Is there another question? What else? I do want to thank the Vestry for their confidence and their support of this. I cannot tell you how much I want to thank Jimmy and Radney for their leadership in this process. They have gotten a lot of extra phone calls, a lot of extra emails, a lot of extra texts for their work on this. But I do think it's important for us to, excuse me, I've talked too much today, I'm losing my voice. It's important for us to have these in place so that we can move forward in a really healthy, positive, exciting way. And I'm grateful for Jimmy and for Radney and their leadership and for the support of the Vestry in this endeavor. Somebody asked about the bylaws. We'll get those posted online or make those available somewhere for people. If you send me an email, I'm happy, or Jimmy an email, we're happy to send you a copy of them. They're not a secret. So let Jimmy or Radney or me know, and we can see. I think Radney has an up-to-date copy. If not, I know Jimmy and I both do. Send us an email. Anything else? Well, thank you guys for being a part of this. I appreciate it. Tell your family and friends, it's all good. We're going to be good.
Great job, John, Deanna. Well done. Jimmy, thank you.
We'll end with this prayer, and this is for a church meeting. We'll also open the parish meeting with this. Almighty and ever-living God, source of all wisdom and understanding, be present with those who take counsel for the renewal and mission of your church. Guide us to perceive what is right and grant us both the courage to pursue it and the grace to accomplish it. Through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen.
Amen.
All right. God bless you guys. Thank you. Spread the good word. Jesus loves you. God loves you. We're trying to love each other. Hang in there. It'll be
Thank
all
you.
right. All right. Take care, guys.
Fair now.